Hello, how are you guys? Welcome to Aaron channel. Before continuing to the storyline, please give your support first by subscribing. Okay, now let's continue. This is the in-depth storyline of the video A Charlie Brown Christmas. Okay, now we start the story. This video tells the story of Charlie Brown, who feels depressed in the midst of the Christmas atmosphere because of the commercialization of the holiday, until finally he finds the true meaning of Christmas.
Christmas time is here, bringing with it the familiar sights of snowflakes drifting through the air and children skating on the frozen pond. Yet for Charlie Brown, the festive spirit remains elusive. While the rest of the Peanuts gang engages in winter fun, Charlie Brown confesses to Linus that he feels a deep sense of wrongness. He admits that, despite the arrival of the holidays, he isn't happy. He doesn't feel the way he is supposed to feel. He acknowledges that he enjoys the trappings of the season that presents, the cards, the decorations, but the underlying depression persists. Linus, listening to this confession while clutching his blanket, bluntly tells Charlie Brown that he is the only person who can take a wonderful season like Christmas and turn it into a problem, labeling him as unique in his ability to be miserable during the happiest time of the year. Seeking some form of connection, Charlie Brown checks his mailbox, hoping for a Christmas card to validate his existence. But he finds only emptiness. The hollow echo of the metal box confirms his fear. Nobody has sent him a card. He sarcastically mutters to himself about the joy of the holiday season, feeling that its primary purpose is to highlight how disliked he is. His mood is further soured by a brief encounter with Violet, who sarcastically thanks him for a card he never sent, and Pigpen, who manages to raise a cloud of dust even in the midst of a pristine snowstorm. Feeling entirely out of sync with the world and its mockery, Charlie Brown decides that he needs professional help to navigate his holiday. He heads to Lucy's psychiatric booth, a crude wooden stand with a sign offering help for 5 cents. Lucy is in, and strictly business, demanding payment up front before she will listen to his woes. Charlie Brown drops a nickel into her tin can, and the sound of the coin delights Lucy, who loves the noise of cold, hard cash. Charlie Brown then lays out his problem. He is depressed, and he knows he should be happy because it is Christmas. But he just isn't. Lucy, adopting her professional persona, attempts to pinpoint his fears by rattling off a list of phobias, hoping to label his condition to make it manageable. Lucy cycles through various fears: hypangiophobia, fear of responsibility, ailurophobia, fear of cats, climacophobia, fear of staircases, and thalassophobia, fear of the ocean, but none of them fit. Finally, she asks if he has pantophobia, the fear of everything. When Charlie Brown yells that that is indeed his problem, Lucy pivots. She diagnoses that what he really needs is involvement to counter his depression. She suggests that he take on a leadership role to immerse himself in the season. Specifically, she invites him to be the director of the upcoming Christmas play. Charlie Brown is surprised but intrigued by the offer, and Lucy assures him she will help, telling him to meet her at the auditorium. Before heading to the auditorium, Charlie Brown encounters further evidence of the commercialism that plagues him. He finds his own dog, Snoopy, busy decorating his doghouse with lights to enter a neighborhood contest solely for the cash prize, a display of greed that disgusts Charlie Brown. Seeking a reprieve, he is stopped by his sister Sally, who asks him to write a letter to Santa for her. What starts as a standard greeting quickly devolves into a list of demands for 10s and 20s, with Sally concluding that all she wants is her fair share. Dismayed by his sister's fixation on money and his dogs, commercial ambition, Charlie Brown heads to the school auditorium, hoping the play will offer the sanctuary he seeks. Charlie Brown arrives at the auditorium ready to take charge, but he is immediately met with chaos. The cast is not preparing or studying lines. Instead, they are engaged in a wild, disjointed dance session fueled by Schroeder's jazz piano. The children are lost in their own worlds, gyrating and bouncing with zero regard for the seriousness of the production. Charlie Brown stands before them, a small, solitary figure of authority, attempting to bring order to a room exploding with apathy and energy. He claps his hands and calls for attention, but the music and the dancing continue unabated, signaling that his tenure as director is going to be a steep uphill battle against the very spirit of indifference he is trying to cure. The atmosphere inside the auditorium was less like a disciplined theater rehearsal and more like a spontaneous explosion of uncontainable, rhythmic energy that defied all logic. Schroeder hunched over his toy piano with the intensity of a concert maestro hammered out a jazz melody that was both infectious and distracting, a complex tapestry of notes that seemed to possess the bodies of everyone in the room. The children were not merely dancing. They were engaged in a series of repetitive, hypnotic trances. To the left, the twins bounced in perfect, eerie unison, their movements synchronized by some invisible metronome. To the right, Shermie performed a shuffling zombie walk, arms extended, eyes glazed over, sliding across the floorboards with a friction that seemed to generate static electricity in the air. In the center of it all was Snoopy, the beagle who defied the laws of physics and canine behavior, flailing his limbs in a loose, rubbery display of joy that mocked the very concept of structure. For Charlie Brown, who had walked through the doors, clutching the fragile hope that this project would be his salvation, the scene was a cacophonous wall of noise. He stood there, his heart sinking into his shoes, realizing that directing this group was akin to trying to herd cats during a thunderstorm. The sheer volume of their indifference to his presence was a physical weight, pressing down on him, making him feel smaller and more insignificant than he had out in the snow. Charlie Brown attempted to make his voice heard above the din of the piano and the shuffling feet, but his calls for action and places were swallowed whole by the overwhelming jazz. It was a profound isolation, standing in a room full of people, yet being completely invisible. He watched Linus, his supposed confidant, dancing with his blanket, abandoning all pretense of philosophical support in favor of the rhythm. He saw the sheer joy on their faces, a joy that had nothing to do with the Christmas story they were supposed to be telling and everything to do with the mindless pleasure of the moment. This was the involvement Lucy had promised. This chaotic, Charlie Brown felt the familiar pang of his depression shifting into frustration. He wasn't asking for professional actors. He was asking for a moment of focus, a single second where they acknowledged that there was a story to be told, a story that meant something. But every time he opened his mouth to speak, Schroeder hit a crescendo or Snoopy let out a silent howl of delight. And Charlie Brown was reminded that in this universe, he was the eternal outsider, the only one burdened by the need for meaning in a world content with noise. Suddenly, the music cut out, not because of Charlie Brown's command, but because Lucy, the self-appointed queen of the production, decided it was time to assert her own brand of dominance. The silence that followed was abrupt and ringing. Lucy marched forward, clutching a stack of scripts like a weapon, her presence commanding a fear that Charlie Brown's earnestness never could. She didn't ask for attention. She demanded it with a glare that could freeze water. "Listen, all of you," she barked, her voice cutting through the lingering echoes of the music. "We've got to get on with this play. She began to hand out the scripts with the efficiency of a drill sergeant, assigning roles not based on talent or suitability, but on her own twisted logic and convenience. She turned to Charlie Brown, not as a subordinate to a director, but as a puppeteer, addressing a puppet, effectively sidelining him in his own production. It was a power play, pure and simple, and Charlie Brown watched as his authority was usurped. Before he even had a chance to wield it, he realized then that he wasn't really the director. He was just another prop in Lucy's world, a figurehead brought in to take the blame if things went wrong, while she dictated the flow of events with her terrifying confidence. The casting process quickly devolved into a farce of vanity and absurdity. Lucy, holding a script with a possessiveness that suggested she had written it herself, announced that she would be playing the role of the innkeeper's wife. Her reasoning was a masterpiece of narcissistic logic. Innkeeperess wives always have naturally curly hair. She preened, touching her own hair, daring anyone to contradict her historical revisionism. Then she turned her sights on Pigpen. The boy stood there, a veritable ecosystem of dirt and grime, a cloud of dust hovering around him like a personal atmosphere. "Pigpen, you're the innkeeper," Lucy declared. Pigpen looked down at his soiled clothes and his filthy hands, his expression one of genuine pragmatism. "In spite of my outward appearance, I shall try to run a neat inn," he said, offering a profound commentary on the nature of perception versus reality. But then, a flicker of self-awareness crossed his face. "Do you think I should wash up?" he asked, a question that threatened to destroy his entire identity. Charlie Brown, desperate for any semblance of professionalism, jumped at the chance. "Yes, wash up," he pleaded, but as soon as the words left his mouth, he knew it was a futile request. Pigpen was not merely dirty. He was historically dirty. He carried the dust of ancient civilizations. Asking him to wash was like asking the Sphinx to shave. The mere suggestion of dust and dirt sent Frida into a panic. The girl with the naturally curly hair, a phrase she repeated like a mantra coiled from Pigpen as if he were radioactive. "This can't go on," she cried out, clutching her precious locks. "The dust, it's taking the curl out of my naturally curly hair." The rehearsal had officially gone off the rails. They were supposed to be reenacting the Nativity, a story of humble beginnings in a manger, and instead, they were embroiled in a dispute about humidity, hygiene, and hair care. Charlie Brown rubbed his temples, feeling a headache blooming behind his eyes. The vanity of the cast was insurmountable. How could they possibly understand the humility of the Christmas story when they were so obsessed with their own appearances? Frida was more concerned with her vanity than with the Virgin Mary. Lucy was more concerned with power than with peace. The play was becoming a mirror of the very commercial, superficial world. Charlie Brown was trying to escape, and he felt the crushing realization that there was no sanctuary to be found here, only a different version of the same noise. And then there was Linus. Sweet, philosophical Linus, who was supposed to be the rock, the voice of reason. Charlie Brown turned to him, hoping for cooperation, and assigned him the role of the shepherd. It was a perfect fit. Or so, he thought. "Linus," Charlie Brown said, his voice firming up, "you've got to get rid of that stupid blanket." The statement hung in the air like a declaration of war. Linus clutched the blue flannel to his cheek, his eyes widening in horror. To ask Linus to give up his blanket was to ask him to stop breathing. "You wouldn't get a nervous shepherd, would you?" Linus argued, his logic surprisingly sound despite his panic. He proposed a compromise, suggesting that he could wear the blanket over his head like a cowl, transforming his security object into a costume piece. Charlie Brown sighed, the weight of the compromise settling on him. Even the shepherd, the symbol of guidance and protection, was riddled with anxiety and dependency. It seemed that everyone in this play, from the director to the cast, was broken in some small, fundamental way, looking for something to hold on to in the cold winter of their discontent. The tension over the script reached a breaking point when Lucy decided that Linus needed motivation to memorize his lines. She didn't offer encouragement or patience. Instead, she offered a threat. "I'll give you 5 good reasons," she snarled, holding up her hand. One by one, she curled her fingers into a tight, formidable fist. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was a display of brute force that stood in stark contrast to the holiday spirit. Linus, recognizing the universal language of pain, quickly agreed that those were indeed good reasons. Charlie Brown watched this exchange with a sense of hopelessness. Fear was the only currency that seemed to work here. Not inspiration, not joy, not the love of the story, but fear. The rehearsal was falling apart before it had even begun. The actors were fighting, the director was being ignored, and the script was being trampled under the weight of egos and insecurities. Charlie Brown realized that if they stayed in this auditorium, surrounded by the distractions of their own personalities, the play would be a disaster. They needed a change of atmosphere. They needed something to anchor them, something to remind them of what Christmas actually was. "This is all wrong," Charlie Brown finally shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. The outburst silenced the room for a brief, stunning second. "We need a Christmas tree," he announced, the idea forming clearly in his mind for the first time. A tree. It was the symbol of life in the dead of winter, a tradition that went back centuries. If they could just find the right tree, maybe, just maybe, it would bring the magic they were missing. It would be a focal point, a center of gravity that would pull all these chaotic elements into orbit. Lucy, ever the pragmatist, immediately jumped on the idea, but twisted it to fit her commercial worldview. "That's it, Charlie Brown," she exclaimed. "You get the tree. I'll handle this crowd." But her vision of a tree was not the organic, living thing Charlie Brown imagined. "Get a great big, shiny, aluminum Christmas tree," she commanded, "maybe painted pink." The crowd cheered at the suggestion. Pink aluminum. It was the ultimate symbol of the artificiality Charlie Brown despised. But he nodded, desperate to get away, desperate to find something, anything that felt real. "I'll take Linus with me," he said, grabbing his friend and heading for the exit. Stepping out of the auditorium was like stepping into a different world, yet the commercialism followed them. Charlie Brown and Linus walked into the night, their breath visible in the freezing air. The silence of the snow was broken by the sweeping beams of massive searchlights cutting through the sky. "We'll find the perfect tree," Charlie Brown muttered, trying to convince himself as much as Linus. But the searchlights guided them not to a forest, but to a used car lot disguised as a Christmas tree market. The lights were blinding, washing out the stars, declaring to the heavens that down here, on earth, everything was for sale. Linus looked up at the beams and made a dry observation. "This really brings Christmas close to a person." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. They were pilgrims in a land of neon, searching for a relic of the past in a landscape of the future. Charlie Brown trudged forward, his head down against the wind, determined to find a tree that had a soul, a tree that had not been manufactured in a factory, a tree that could save his play and, perhaps, save him from the crushing weight of a hollow holiday. The tree lot was a dazzling, disorienting spectacle of modern manufacturing, a veritable forest of the future that had seemingly banished nature altogether. As Charlie Brown and Linus stepped deeper into the aisles, they were surrounded not by the earthy scent of pine or fir, but by the cold, sterile smell of metal and plastic. Rows upon rows of artificial trees towered over them, their branches shimmering under the harsh glare of the floodlights. These were not trees born from the soil. They were stamped out of factories, monuments to durability and efficiency. Some were purple, some were gold, and many were the coveted pink aluminum that Lucy had dreamed of. They reflected the light with a hard, unyielding brilliance, casting sharp shadows on the snow. Charlie Brown walked slowly past them, his reflection distorted in the shiny needles, feeling a profound sense of alienation. In this place, perfection was the standard, and every tree was identical to the one next to it, unchanging and utterly soured of life. It was a marketplace of hollow beauty, where the chaotic, organic growth of the natural world had been replaced by the safe, predictable gleam of commerce. Charlie Brown reached out and tapped one of the aluminum trunks with his knuckle. Clank. The sound rang out, hollow and tinny, vibrating in the cold air like a dropped coin. It was the sound of emptiness. There was no sap running through these veins, no history in rings of wood, no connection to the earth. "Gee, do they still make wooden Christmas trees?" Linus asked, his voice filled with a genuine curiosity that highlighted just how far they had strayed from tradition. The question hung in the air, unanswered by the silent sentinels of steel surrounding them. Charlie Brown felt a wave of sadness wash over him. The search for a tree was supposed to be a quest for the spirit of Christmas, but here, amidst the polka dot trees and the holographic needles, he felt more lost than ever. He realized that the spirit everyone kept talking about had been packaged, shrink-wrapped, and sold. The depression that had dogged him all day deepened, fueled by the realization that even the most sacred symbols of the holiday had been co-opted by the very forces he was trying to escape. And then, in the midst of this metallic jungle, a small burst of green caught his eye. It was sitting atop a wooden crate, almost invisible in the shadow of a towering purple aluminum giant. It was a real tree, or at least a sapling that was trying very hard to be one. It was tiny, frail, and sparsely branched, leaning slightly to one side as if it were tired of fighting the cold. Its needles were browning in places, and it looked as though a strong gust of wind might blow it over completely. By any objective standard, it was a weed, a mistake, a reject that had no business being on a lot filled with glittering perfection. But to Charlie Brown, it was a revelation. It was organic, it was flawed, it was struggling. In that little tree, Charlie Brown saw a reflection of himself, awkward, out of place, and desperately in need of acceptance. It stood there with a quiet dignity, refusing to be outshined by the flashy giants around it. And in that moment, Charlie Brown's heart opened up. "This little green one here seems to need a home," Charlie Brown announced softly, a tender smile breaking through his gloom for the first time that day. He approached the tree with the reverence one might show a wounded bird. He didn't see a scraggly branch. He saw potential. He saw a living thing that had been overlooked and undervalued, much like he felt he was by the other children. The concept of needing a home resonated deeply with him. This wasn't just a decoration to be displayed and then discarded. It was a companion. "I don't know, Charlie Brown," Linus said, his skepticism rising as he examined the pathetic specimen. "Remember what Lucy said. This doesn't seem to fit the modern spirit." Linus was right. Of course, this tree was the antithesis of the modern spirit. It was humble, fragile, and ancient. But Charlie Brown didn't care about the modern spirit. He cared about the Christmas spirit. "I don't care," he replied firmly. "I'll decorate it, and it'll be just right for our play. Besides, I think it needs me. It was a definitive statement of purpose. He wasn't just choosing a prop. He was making a moral choice to value the living over the artificial. He picked up the little tree, careful not to shake it too hard, though a few needles drifted to the ground nonetheless. It was light as a feather, a stark contrast to the heavy metal bases of the aluminum trees. Linus watched him with a mixture of worry and resignation. He knew what awaited them back at the auditorium. He knew that Lucy and the others would not see the poetic beauty in this twig. They would only see a failure. They expected a spectacle, a pink, shimmering beacon of commercial success, and Charlie Brown was bringing them a plant that looked like it had barely survived a drought. "We're going to get killed," Linus might have thought, but he said nothing more, simply following his friend. Charlie Brown, however, was buoyed by a newfound confidence. For the first time all day, he had made a decision that felt right. He wasn't following orders. He was following his heart. He cradled the pot in his hands, protecting the little tree from the biting wind, determined to prove that a little bit of love could transform even the humblest of things into something magnificent. The walk back to the auditorium was a journey of determination. The searchlights behind them continued to sweep the sky, but Charlie Brown no longer paid them any mind. He had his prize. The cold air nipped at his nose, and the snow crunched under his boots, but he felt a warmth radiating from the small plant in his arms. He began to imagine what the tree would look like on stage. With the right lighting, maybe some tinsel, and a lot of care, it could shine brighter than any aluminum fabrication. He was constructing a narrative in his head where the underdog wins, where the rejected stone becomes the cornerstone. It was a classic Charlie Brown hope, fragile, perhaps delusional, but utterly sincere. He wasn't doing this to be contrarian. He was doing it because he truly believed that the essence of Christmas couldn't be bought in a store. It had to be nurtured. As they approached the school, the muffled sounds of the jazz piano drifted out into the night, signaling that the chaos inside hadn't stopped. Charlie Brown took a deep breath, braced himself, and pushed open the heavy double doors, carrying his little green friend into the lion's den. Inside the auditorium, time seemed to have stood still, or rather, looped endlessly. Schroeder was back at his piano, his fingers flying over the keys in a complex Beethoven piece now, trying to bring some culture to the masses, while Snoopy sat atop the piano, mimicking a vulture. The rest of the cast sat around in various states of boredom and anticipation. They were waiting for their director to return, not with leadership, but with the prop that would save their production, the great, pink, aluminum tree. Lucy sat center stage, her arms crossed, tapping her foot with impatient authority. The air was thick with expectation. They wanted the glitz. They wanted the glamour. They wanted the shiny object that would make their play a success in the eyes of the neighborhood. When the doors opened and the cold draft swept in, all heads turned. The music stopped abruptly. The dancing ceased. Silence descended upon the room, heavy and judging, as every pair of eyes fixed upon the entrance, waiting to be dazzled by the chrome masterpiece Charlie Brown had been sent to retrieve.
expression.